Yo guys, welcome back to another Danmachi Memoria Freese video. Okay, so in today's video, it's another Monday, which means it's another tier list. And don't worry, I've got loads in the works. You guys have been asking me like crazy for tier lists on all sorts of things, but I am going to cover them. Now, as usual, I'm going to cover the criteria for this tier list so no one gets confused, no one gets angry. And that is, this tier list leans more towards content that is not war games. So if it's war game related, it's not as valued. I mean, it takes wargame value into consideration. Just if I have to weigh what's more important in this tier list, wargame or record buster or familiar rush or something like that, wargame will take a backseat. It also assumes that these units have been measured at the max limit broken level, at the max ascension level, in the most ideal conditions, how they perform. It's a comparison within the element, not a comparison against other elements. And I've done my best with my own sort of algorithm to take out any qualitative bias that I may have and measured it quantitatively, so it turns out like this. In saying that, it is hidden on the screen right now because I kind of want you guys to watch so I can explain a little bit of what's going on. Anyway, before I get into the video anymore, I would like to give a massive shout out to everyone that came out to my streams. They were a great success. Obviously a few hiccups, a few laughs at my expense, but if you turned up to any of the 2 streams that I've currently have had, thank you so much. I really appreciate it, and there will be streams going forward every Thursday and Friday after 8 PM BST, whatever that is comparatively to your time zone. You can figure that out because I'm not going to do that. That's when I'm going to be streaming. Anything else before I move on? I don't think so. Anyway, right, so let's get into the tier list. I'm going to go over the D tier list with the honorable mentions. I'm not going to go through every character because the D tier list is probably, let me put it this way, every tier list so far, you can consider all of the units good to use other than D tier. D tier is basically the bottom of the barrel, the dregs, don't use them. But I will give considerable mentions to the Lily and the Mikoto because they do have some potential to be used. They are usable, if nothing else. However, they do lack value and worth compared to all of the other water units in the tier lists above them. So, moving on to C tier. On the end, usually I don't list these tiers from left to right, but in this case I do have to mention that. Give me 1 second actually, because I feel like Chigusa should over here. if I'm gonna do it in order, I may as well do it properly. For some reason I can't move. Oh, there we go. Okay, right, cool. Now this one is from order to left to right. I apologize. Okay, so Chigusa is here because she's at that level where she doesn't really have any beneficial assists to the team, which is a big flaw, but she does have that 100% SA gauge charge, which is a massive and valuable thing to have, especially with a unit that has a super modifier on her AoEs. The only problem is she does bring the SA gauge charge, she does bring the super modifier on her AoE. The only problem is that she has no debuffs and no buffs for either the strength, physical resistance, or water and water resistance, but buffs or debuffs. So she lacks everything. So any damage that she's going to get, she needs to rely on the rest of her team to get it. All she brings is the base mechanics and multipliers to make sure that she can hit semi-hard, but not extravagantly. Moving across, we have the Winter Bell. He's trash, man. I hate him. Like, my personal opinions, I hate him, but taking away any personal bias, like I said, removing strength and magic buffs as an AoE is very valuable, especially with some events having multiple enemies. At Heroic Trials specifically, he has come very much in handy. He doesn't do anything for damage, but he comes in handy in terms of removing strength and magic buffs as an AoE, and that's definitely not anything to ignore or brush under the carpet, because it is important, and removing buffs a while ago was a really big deal. I mean, there are even still some bosses in the storyline portion of the game that I know a lot of people haven't beaten, where removing a strength buff basically necessary, otherwise you're just not going to do it. Moving over from him, now we're going to go into the game real quick. Let me just actually, what am I doing? I should have the there we go, that should do it. Okay, so we're in the game now, and I want to examine this unit a little bit closer so you guys understand why she is what she is. She is a little bit of an older unit. The wedding units are somewhat old now, but her stats are pretty decent for an older unit. Like coming up, like I said, this is the list assumes that they are in the most ideal position with the most ideal scenario and setup for themselves. Those stats are nothing to smirk at, even for an older unit. If we come over here, she is somewhat relegated specifically to single target, which is why she's in C tier and C tier only. But the SA, I wouldn't really. There's nothing extravagant about the SA, it's rather simple. The reason she's in C tier for me is because of the skills. Now, if you come here, like so, she has a self strength and water damage buff of 50%, a huge buff. Given that single target multipliers hit harder than AoE multipliers, it means Record Buster, she's going to do stupid damage when against an enemy that's weak to water. She also has an ally damage reduction buff of 25% for 2 turns. That's great, especially for some Record Busters that really hit hard. Like if you've gone up against Revis, Otal, you know that they hit really hard. And then finally, a high single target attack that removes all strength buffs from enemies. Basically, she is what I like to call a pure Record Buster unit. Like she's specifically for nothing else except single target. The fact that she does have an ally buff with a single target move means you can bring her as a sack unit if you need that damage reduction. If you want to keep it mono water, there are other units outside of the water element that are good for that, but if you wanted to keep it specifically mono water, there you have 25% damage reduction for 2 turns, and that's the reason she is in C tier. So we're going to bring it back up to let me just turn this back on now. Bring it back up to the tier list now. Moving across again for the Lily. Actually, we're going to turn it straight back off. I need to explain the Lily as well, so let me come back here, discuss the Lily. This video may be a little bit longer than the previous ones because a few of you guys actually asked me to spend a little bit longer explaining the units. There we go. Sorry, it's because I don't have her. She's sort of blacked out. Again, max stats. Her stats, not the greatest. 30% seal on the SA, that's complete garbage outside of Wargame. She is, if I do recall correctly, yeah, she's relegated specifically to AoE moves, which is kind of a down, it's like a negative, obviously, just like it's a negative for the Tiona, but, sorry, Tiona, I always mix up the pronunciation. Anyway, but she has a status debuff reduction of 1 turn, which is kind of meh compared to what we have now. We do have units outside of the element that can remove or lower debuffs by 2 turns. In fact, we have units within the element that lower debuffs more. Second skill removes guard rate and heal buffs. This is obviously designed for war games right here, but sitting here, the AoE as an ally magic and water attack damage buff, that, because magic buffs and magic teams are hard to come by, this in itself helps so much, because even as a sack unit, if you're a new player, you will come to realize that magic teams are a lot harder to put together. So just by having a buff specifically or aimed towards magic units within the element, like having the magic damage type as well as the element damage type in a buff specifically for magic units, is going to come in handy for a lot of criteria. Other than that, I mean, she's not fantastic. I think she's sitting somewhere between D and C, because she's definitely not as good as the Tiona, but she is worth note just as a sack unit alone. Her stats are not terrible. You can take her to 7th zone. She still probably will be pretty handy if you need her, if you have her MLB, that is. Remember, this is speaking as if they are maxed out. So we're going to go back to the tier list now. Let me just press this right here. Cool. The Reveria and the eyes, they are slowly falling off. They're not terrible, but I don't think they merit or have enough merit to discuss them individually. They are on the very end of the C tier. They do have utility, which is why they're on the list. Not so much damage. but they do have utility, which is why they're here. Useful utility that you can still actually use, not utility that's so underpowered that you can't use them at all. Okay, so we're going to move on to B tier now. And starting us off on the tail end of B tier is Alicia. Now, Alicia has no damage, none at all, but she excels in a dramatic amount of survival utility. Dramatic may be an oversell. She has a lot of utility in terms of defense. Now, this might be ridiculous to say, but I don't value defense as much as I do offensive utility, unless it's like really high up there, especially if it comes with nothing but utility. Like if you bring no damage to the table, not even like an average amount of damage, then it's not worth. But obviously she's in B tier because she brings so much defensive utility, and that's the only why. Now we're moving on over to Tsubaki. Tsubaki has a decent amount of damage, as far as I'm aware. Actually, we're going to check right now, because I don't want to give misinformation. I want to make sure I'm giving you guys the correct information. Forget her stats. I know her stats are good, but I just want to check to see if she is. No, she is not. So she's not relegated specifically to either AoE or single target. But she has utility. She has good damage. She has a traditional. I'm going to say traditional because there are a lot of mixed target style units in the whole unit pool of every element that have this. 2 AoE skills with utility, and then a third single target skill with an additional percentage modifier to just up the damage a little bit. And she is one of them. She has good damage, she has great utility, she is a great sack unit if you need her for physical water teams. As you can see here, she debuffs. Having a debuff, let me explain this properly. I value debuff sack units higher than I value buff sack units, because debuff sack units ensure that even your last member can take advantage of that debuff, whereas buff sack units can only buff the current members that are on the front line of the team. So we'll head back to the tier list right now. Moving across, we have Winter Haruhime. Now, Winter Haruhime, oh my god, like, she don't do naffle for damage, but all of the utility that she does bring, even though it's on the lower end of the percentages, because of the utility that it is, like MP regen, physical resist and magic resist, lowering enemy buffs and allied debuffs, all of that is amazing for survival. Like, if you're trying to clear harder content that you're not worried about clearing within the time or turn limit that they've set to you, you literally just want to get that clear reward, you ain't trying to S clear, she's your girl, man. She will keep you alive. She'll make sure that your skills, your MPs replenished. There is no better unit in the water element for that, in my opinion. But because she still has those lower percentage modifiers on them, she's sitting within the B tier. Now I'm gonna actually jump back into the game so we can explain this Reveria. Excuse me while I get back into it. The stats, okay, magic stats are always going to be a little bit lower than strength stats anyway, so that is still a great magic stat, triple S right there. She is unfortunately relegated specifically to single target, but she brings so much. Okay, so her SA, not going to hit as hard as some of the other water unit SAs that we do have. Excuse me while I just take a drink. But looking at the utility she brings right here, allies magic and water attack damage plus 40%. Now, if you're not aware, water has a good chunk of magic magic units, so it's not uncommon to actually see multiple so if you were to run a water record buster, most people would probably end up bringing this Reveria, the Anniversary Reveria, and the Leafia for the optimal amount of damage. And that says it all. All three of those are magic damage units, and they hit so hard, yeah, incredibly. And then having them, having one of them be able to bring a utility to increase the damage earlier on. I mean, Anniversary Reveria is probably not, and Leafia is probably not the best one. Literally, if you have the Leafia and the Anniversary Reveria, you don't really need the buff from this Reveria, but you get what I mean as an example. She removes strength buffs, which is fantastic. I mean, the majority of the enemies you're going to go against are physical anyway, rather than magical. So having a strength buff removal is very useful. And then she also has a super modifier on her final skill that increases single target damage by 20%. And that is a debuff, by the way. I know it's worded weirdly. You probably already are aware, but even though it says plus 20%, that still counts as a debuff, not a buff. And she does do a lot of damage, a considerable amount of damage, which is why she's on this. She obviously doesn't bring what I would call core utility beyond the single target damage and the magic and water buff, but the fact that she brings a type and element buff, and then the single target buff, debuff, sorry, as well as the strength buff removal means that she has enough offensive utility to be comfortable within the B tier. And now we are on Luna. Now, the reason I put Luna in B tier, even though she's a great unit, she does do a lot of damage. I feel like I do need to. She doesn't have. Okay, you know what? I'm gonna just show you within the game actually, so that there is no confusion here. I'm not saying like B tier. I'm not saying she's bad. You need to understand that before anything else. So let's have a look. Over 2,000. That's at triple S strength. That's crazy. AOE SA. Okay, so designed for war games. Her skill 1 is just a utility skill, but the problem is it's because she counter rate, heal, and magic resist only. That only having a magic resist on there and not a physical and magical resist 30% brings the value of that ally buff down for me. And then strength plus 65%. Okay, if you're playing anything other than war games, that strength buff is going to be null and void if you, like everyone else, have a Haruhime. Moving on to the next skill, it's literally only a physical resist, counter, and heal reduction buff, and you can see she is specifically designed for war game. And like I said beforehand, war game, the value of war game utility is lower than other content utility. Now, the fact that she doesn't lower elemental resistance, or at least lower magic resistance, as well as the physical resistance, really stopped me from putting her in A tier on this one. And then on skill 3, she buffs her. No, sorry, she doesn't buff anything. She does the percentage modifier based on the physical resist reduction on the enemy. This is usually where you would have the, 2 AoEs and then the single target with the percentage modifier on the end here, but she doesn't have that, so she's relegated specifically to AoE events, unless you want to use her as a sack unit, in which case there are better sack units even within this element pool to use other than that. But the fact that she does great damage and she supports herself as well as other physical water units, if you can just have another element buffer on the team and a element resistance debuffer, she will do you well. But the fact that she requires that much support is what's keeping her in B tier. Now the eyes, okay, this eyes even at +2 has carried me through AoE fire zones and things like that. She does an extravagant amount of damage, and if you come into the game, I'll show you. I know I'm back and forth here, but as long as I can give you guys a good example of what I mean and what I'm talking about, you can understand a lot better, so we'll be okay. I hope you don't mind jumping back and forth. Don't worry about the stats, her stats are amazing. SA is okay, like she gives herself an 80% water damage buff. It would be much better if it was an ally's water buff, but beggars can't be choosers. She does buff her own strength and water damage, which is always a plus, that she's self-sufficient when it comes to buffing. It gives you the possibility to bring her in last after the sack units, because like I said, I value debuffing sack units over buffing sack units. This means that she can take advantage of the fact that she buffs herself, come in last, and the enemy's already got the debuffs that are required. Well, sorry, I scrolled too far there. Skill 2, AoE, high modifier, removes agility and dex buffs. Obviously, this is clearly catered towards war game. but it does a considerable amount of damage even with a high modifier over a super modifier. And then lastly, the single target here is a super modifier without the without the additional percentage modifier. And the reason they've done that is to balance her out, because like I said, she does do a good amount of damage even without that, and she is self-sufficient. She does give herself that strength and water buff to go along with it, which is why she's in B tier. And the artwork, I don't mind the artwork, the arch in the back, nice. But let's head back over to the tier list, shall we? We're now jumping into A tier. I'm going to have to speed up because we're already at 20 minutes in the video. Leafia does an extreme amount of damage. She should have an AoE skill. I'm going to come back to the game actually, so we can have a quick look at her. I just want to make sure that I'm correct here. Like you can see, I don't have her. There's the self buff, no ally buff unfortunately, but she is relegated to single target. But she does have a magic resist and water resist debuff, so if even just having the elemental resist debuff there puts her up there in my opinion. Now the only downside to the fact that she does a buttload of damage and is quite self-sufficient is the fact that she removes her own buffs after every time she uses skill 3. So it's a lot like the Aisha situation where you'll buff yourself and then basically remove the buff when you use the skill, but the trade-off is she does a shitload of damage, and that alone is worth putting her in A tier in my opinion. Coming across now, Ardi, oh my god, so much utility, it's crazy. She does next to no damage, but when it comes to survival, she is the best adventurer I can ever bring to any content actually. She has a physical, she has resistance buffs, she has penetration and crit debuffs, she has a heal, she removes strength from magic buffs. It's crazy. She has KO resist, for God's sakes. Moving across from there, the eyes, these new units, they are great. They do a buttload of damage. The eyes is here because she does do good damage, but she also has that water resistance debuff and a massive guard rate debuff, which means you're going to be putting out a lot of damage. Now obviously I understand these swimsuit units are designed to be put together in a team, that's why they all complement each other really well. But these two stand out above all of the others because they will work even without the other units. They do obviously need a little bit of support, but not as much as the Luna. But the eyes, I thank God so much that I got this eyes, because I now have a water debuffing unit that does apply it as AoE. Moving over to the Haruhime, oh my god, she hurts, man. She does a load of damage, and if I'm not mistaken, let's come back over to the game because I don't want to make a statement and then it be incorrect. It's just the skills we're looking at here. She has these are buffs, they're considerable buffs at that, gets the additional action. She also has a regen, a super modifier, which Luna does not have, and then the high modifier with the additional percentage. She does hurt, she does a lot of damage, and she does have a good amount of utility as well. Let me just check the SA because I did not do that. Allies water attack damage plus 50%. That SA alone is worth it. And then finally, we have come to the S tier. Now, again, I know what you're thinking, oh, it's just another record buster unit. Yes, but you don't understand. She buffs her own magic, buffs her own dexterity, buffs her own water element damage, and then buffs her SA damage. Like, what? You know, all she needs is a water resistance debuff and a magic resist debuff, and she's good to go, right? She does so much damage, and having that much self-sustaining utility is amazing, as well as the fact that she having a 100% SA gauge charge on top of all that utility means you can replace Line or any other SA gauge sack unit for a different sack unit, allowing you to apply more utility towards the rest of the team. So she picks up a lot of the slack where the others miss. Her stats are great, her damage is great, her utility is great. There is no argument for her not to be in S tier. And obviously, I know I've gone through that, but I don't really feel like I need to go over in depth. You guys understand and know what she does. If you don't, you can always, you know, at me in Discord, and I'm happy to go into it in further detail. But yeah, that is this week's tier list, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure to drop a like if you did, subscribe if you're not. Social media links in the description, and as always, guys, I love you and I'll catch you later.
Just